They called him the Iron Duke, not as a title of honor, not as a compliment, but as a warning. In the grand estates of the Northern Kingdom, where power was measured in land and lineage, where a single word from the right mouth could destroy a family's fortune overnight, there lived a man so feared that grown men stumbled over their words in his presence. Servants walked the corridors with their eyes fixed to the marble floors when he passed. Noblewomen who dreamed of crowns and diamonds felt their blood run cold at the mention of his name. Duke Cassian Aldrich Thornwood, 29 years old, master of 7 estates, controller of the kingdom's largest steel empire, advisor to the king himself, and utterly, terrifyingly alone. But here's what you need to understand about the Iron Duke, what the whispers in the servants' quarters never quite captured, what the society pages could never print. His isolation wasn't circumstantial. It was chosen, calculated, as deliberate as every business decision he'd ever made. 37 women had sought his hand in marriage. Let that sink in for a moment. 37, each one more beautiful than the last. Daughters of earls and viscounts. Women who could trace their bloodlines back 6 centuries. Women who spoke 4 languages and played the piano like angels, and knew exactly which fork to use at a 12-course dinner. 37 times he refused. The first few rejections caused scandal. By the 10th, they caused speculation. By the 20th, they caused fear. What was wrong with these women? Or worse, what was wrong with him? But those who asked the question missed the point entirely. It wasn't that these women lacked beauty. Lady Cordelia Ashworth had hair like spun gold and eyes that poets wrote sonnets about. It wasn't that they lacked breeding. The Honourable Beatrice Sinclair could recite her family tree back to the Norman conquest. It wasn't even that they lacked intelligence. Several were remarkably well read, conversant in philosophy and politics. No, the Duke rejected them for a far simpler, far more damning reason. Not one of them stirred what he had buried so deep. He'd almost forgotten it existed. Compassion, tenderness, faith, the ability to kneel before anyone greater than himself. You see, the Iron Duke hadn't always been iron. Once, a lifetime ago, there had been a boy who laughed, who ran through gardens chasing butterflies, who said his prayers before bed and truly believed, that God heard every word. But that boy died the night his parents did. A carriage accident on a rain-slicked road, a letter delivered at midnight, a 12-year-old child waking up as a duke, with estates to manage, vultures to fight off, and a heart that learned to turn to steel or shatter completely. He chose steel, and steel he became. But there was one person who saw through the armor, one person who remembered the boy beneath the blade. The Dowager Duchess Beatrice, his grandmother. She was 83 years old, sharp as a tack, and spent 3 hours every morning in her private chapel, while the rest of the household buzzed with gossip about which noblewoman would attempt to catch the Duke next. The Dowager Duchess prayed, not for a bride of status, not for a merger of fortunes or a strategic alliance. She prayed for a woman shaped by grace. She prayed for someone who would lead her grandson back to God, back to his own humanity, back to the man he was supposed to become before tragedy turned him to iron. And then, without fanfare, without announcement, God answered. Her name was Elara Winters, and she was nobody. At least, that's what the world would have said. No title, no family name that appeared in the registers, no portrait hanging in any ancestral hall. Elara worked in the Duke's household, but not in any position that would bring her into his orbit. She wasn't a governess to children who didn't exist. She wasn't a lady's maid to a duchess who never visited. She organized records in the library. She helped the elderly housekeeper, Mrs. Pemberton, when her joints ached too much to climb the stairs. She mended linens. She arranged flowers in rooms the Duke never entered. She slipped in and out of corridors like a ghost, noticed by everyone and acknowledged by no one. The Duke had probably passed her 100 times, maybe more. If you'd asked him to describe her face, he couldn't have done it. She existed in his awareness the way wallpaper exists present, but irrelevant, part of the background machinery that kept his world running smoothly. But if the Duke didn't see Elara, God certainly did, because Elara carried a cross that would have crushed most people. She was 24 years old and completely alone in the world. Her mother had died giving birth to her younger brother, Thomas, read from his wife's death, had drunk himself into an early grave 3 years later, leaving behind 2 orphan children and debts that multiplied like weeds. Elara had been 14 when she became both mother and father to a 7-year-old boy. She worked wherever she could find work. She lied about her age to get positions that paid enough to keep them fed. She went hungry so Thomas wouldn't. She wore the same dress until it fell apart at the seams, then sewed it back together and wore it some more. And somehow, against every odd, she kept them alive. Until Thomas got sick. It started small. A cough that wouldn't go away. Fatigue that sleep couldn't cure. Then came the fevers, the weight loss, the blood in his handkerchief that he tried to hide but Elara always found. The physician's diagnosis was delivered with the kind of clinical detachment that medical men use when they're pronouncing a death sentence. Consumption, advanced stage, treatment possible, but expensive, very expensive. How expensive? More money than Elara would earn in 5 years. Maybe 10. She asked about charity hospitals. The physician gave her a look that said everything his words didn't. That charity hospitals were where poor people went to die slowly instead of quickly. That Thomas would be lucky to last 6 months in such a place. That she should prepare herself for the inevitable. Elara thanked him politely, paid him the coins she couldn't afford to spend, and waited until he left before she fell to her knees. Not in despair, in prayer. Every night after that, she knelt on the cold wooden floor of the tiny room she shared with Thomas in the servants' quarters. Her knees bore permanent bruises from those hours. Her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles went white. Her prayers, whispered so she wouldn't wake her brother, rose like incense in the darkness. She didn't pray for wealth. She didn't pray for a miracle cure. She didn't even pray for Thomas to live, though God knows she wanted that more than anything. She prayed for strength. Strength to endure if he died. Strength to keep faith if God's answer was no. Strength to trust that there was purpose in suffering, even when that suffering felt like drowning in an ocean with no shore in sight. Because Elara had learned something that the Iron Duke never had. That true faith isn't believing God will give you what you want. True faith is trusting God even when he doesn't. Even when the answer is suffering. Even when the cross gets heavier and heavier and you can barely take the next step. If God willed her to suffer, she would suffer faithfully. She had no idea that her faithfulness was about to collide with the Duke's emptiness in a way that would change both their lives forever. It happened on a Tuesday night in October. The kind of night when the wind howled like a wounded animal and rain lashed against the windows hard enough to crack glass. The kind of night when even the bravest servants checked the locks twice and crossed themselves before bed. The Duke had been working late in his study, as usual. Ledgers and contracts and correspondence that never seemed to end. He dismissed his valet hours ago, preferring solitude to company, silence to small talk. Around midnight, he stood to pour himself a brandy. That's when the room tilted. Not gently, not gradually. One moment he was upright. The next, the floor was rushing toward his face. He tried to catch himself, but his legs wouldn't respond. His vision blurred. His chest felt like someone had wrapped iron bands around it and was tightening them systematically, rib by rib. He hit the ground hard. The brandy glass shattered. The sound echoed through the study like a gunshot. And then, nothing. The Duke didn't call for help. He couldn't. His throat had closed. His lungs couldn't pull air. Darkness crowded at the edges of his vision. And for the first time in 17 years, the Iron Duke felt something he'd almost forgotten existed. Fear. Pure, primal, animal fear. He was going to die. Here, alone. On the floor of his study, surrounded by contracts and coins, with no one who loved him and nothing to show for his life, except estates and achievements that would pass to some distant cousin, who'd probably drink away the fortune within a decade. This was it. This was how it ended. But it wasn't, because Elara, working late in the library 2 floors below, heard the crash. Most of the servants would have ignored it. The Duke's rages were legendary. If he'd thrown something or knocked over furniture in a fit of temper, that was his business. Smart servants learned to mind their own business when it came to the Iron Duke. But Elara wasn't most servants. She set down the letter she'd been organizing, smoothed her worn dress, and climbed the stairs to the study. Her heart beat faster with each step, not because she was afraid of the Duke, but because something in her spirit was pulling her forward with an urgency she didn't understand. The study door was closed. She knocked. No answer. She knocked again. Your Grace? I heard a noise. Are you well? Silence. Every instinct of self-preservation screamed at her to walk away. Don't get involved. Don't overstep your station. Don't risk being dismissed for entering the Duke's private chambers without permission. But there was another voice too. Quieter, deeper, more insistent. Go in. Elara turned the handle. What she saw made her blood freeze. The Duke lay motionless on the floor, his face ashen, his lips tinged blue. Broken glass glittered around him like cursed diamonds. His eyes were half open but unfocused, staring at nothing. For a heartbeat, she thought she was too late, that she'd walked in on a corpse. Then she saw his chest rise. Barely. A shallow, struggling breath that sounded like it took every ounce of strength he possessed. Elara didn't scream, didn't run, didn't freeze. She dropped to her knees beside him and pressed her fingers to his neck, searching for a pulse. There, weak, too weak, fretting like a candle flame in a hurricane. Stay with me, she whispered. Your Grace, can you hear me? Stay with me. No response. She ran to the door and screamed for help. Her voice, usually so quiet, so careful, shattered the midnight silence like thunder. Someone, anyone. The Duke has collapsed. Fetch a physician. Now. Footsteps thundered through the halls. Within minutes, the study was chaos. Servants running in every direction. The housekeeper shouting orders. Someone dispatched on horseback to fetch Dr. Henshaw, the Duke's personal physician. But the physician's estate was an hour away, maybe more in this storm. An hour the Duke might not have. Mrs. Pemberton, the elderly housekeeper, wrung her hands. We need to move him to his chambers. Carefully. Oh Lord, carefully. 4 footmen lifted the Duke as gently as they could. He didn't wake, didn't respond. His head lowered to the side like a puppet with cut strings. They carried him to his bedroom, a massive chamber Elara had only seen while cleaning, never while occupied. They laid him on the bed. Someone built up the fire. Someone else brought cool cloths. And then the servants did what servants always do in moments of crisis. They waited for someone more important to take charge. Dr. Henshaw arrived 70 minutes later, soaked from the rain, carrying a leather bag that smelled of camphor and carbolic acid. He examined the Duke with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd seen death 1,000 times and was usually too late to prevent it. Fever, he pronounced. Severe. Cause unknown. Could be his heart. Could be his lungs. Could be any number of things. He pulled out vials and instruments. I'll bleed him. Apply leeches. If the fever breaks, he might survive. If it doesn't. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The Duke remained unconscious through it all. Through the bleeding. Through the leeches. Through the medications that Dr. Henshaw forced down his throat with a spoon and prayers. Hours passed. The fever climbed higher. By dawn, the physician looked exhausted. I've done everything I can, he admitted. The rest is up to God. And frankly, he glanced at the Duke's grey face. I've seen men in better condition dead by noon. Prepare yourself. One by one, the servants left. They had duties, work to do, a household to run. The Duke would either live or die, and their presence wouldn't change the outcome. But Elara stayed. She pulled a chair to the bedside and sat down. Mrs. Pemberton tried to shoo her away. You'll exhaust yourself, girl. And for what? He doesn't even know you're here. That doesn't matter, Elara said quietly. It doesn't matter, child. He's unconscious. You're wasting your time. Elara looked at the housekeeper with eyes that held a strange, unshakable certainty. Mrs. Pemberton, if I were dying, would you want someone to pray for me? The old woman's face softened. Of course, dear. Then that's what I'm going to do, whether he knows I'm here or not. Mrs. Pemberton sighed, patted Elara's shoulder, and left her to her vigil. And so Elara prayed. Not with polished words, not with the formal liturgies she'd heard in church. Her prayers were raw, desperate. Tear-soaked pleas offered up from a heart that knew what it meant to watch someone die and feel utterly helpless. Please, she whispered, please don't take him. I know he's difficult. I know he's proud. But I've seen the sadness in him, Lord. I've seen how alone he is. Please, give him time. Give him a chance to find you again. She prayed through the morning, through the afternoon, through the second night. The fever raged. The Duke thrashed in his sleep, crying out words that made no sense. Once, he called for his mother. Elara's heart broke at the sound. This powerful man, reduced to a child calling for a woman 2 decades dead. She dipped cloths in cool water and pressed them to his forehead. She sang hymns softly, the ones her own mother had sung to her. She read scripture aloud, hoping somehow the words would reach him even in unconsciousness. And she prayed. God, how she prayed. On the 3rd day, as dawn broke cold and grey through the windows, something changed. The Duke's breathing steadied. The violent thrashing calmed. The deathly pallor began to fade from his cheeks. Elara, exhausted beyond measure, leaned forward and pressed her hand to his forehead. Cool, not cold, not fevered, just cool. Thank you, she breathed. Oh, thank you. She was so tired, she could barely keep her eyes open. Her head drooped forward. She meant to rest it on her arms for just a moment. Just a moment. She fell asleep with her hand still on the Duke's forehead, her lips still moving in silent prayer. That's how he found her when he finally opened his eyes. The Duke's first conscious thought was confusion. Where was he? His bedroom, yes, but something was wrong. The light was all wrong. His body felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, and there was someone touching his forehead. He turned his head slowly, because it felt like his skull was full of broken glass, and saw her, a young woman he didn't recognize, asleep in a chair beside his bed. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins. Her simple dress was wrinkled and stained. Her face was pale with exhaustion, but her hand rested gently against his forehead, and even in sleep, her lips moved slightly. Was she praying? The Duke tried to speak. His throat was so dry it felt like sandpaper. Who? The word came out as barely a croak. The sound woke her instantly. Her eyes flew open, brown eyes, he noticed. Warm brown, like honey in sunlight. Your Grace. She sat up so quickly she nearly knocked over the chair. You're awake. Oh, thank God. You're awake. How do you feel? Should I fetch Dr. Henshaw? Are you in pain? Do you need water? He stared at her. His mind, usually so sharp, struggled to form coherent thoughts. Who are you? Something flickered across her face. Not hurt, exactly. More like recognition of an expected truth. My name is Elara, Your Grace. I work in the household. Please, let me get you water. She moved to the bedside table where a pitcher sat, poured a glass with shaking hands, and helped him sit up enough to drink. The water was the most glorious thing he'd ever tasted. What happened? He asked when he could speak again. You collapsed 3 days ago, in your study. Dr. Henshaw said it was a severe fever of unknown origin. He was uncertain you'd survive. Her voice was matter of fact, but her hands trembled as she set the glass down. 3 days? He looked around the room, trying to piece together memories that scattered like smoke. Have you been here the entire time? She hesitated. Yes, Your Grace. Why? The question seemed to surprise her. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Because you needed someone, and everyone else had left. That should have been nothing. A servant doing her duty. But something in her voice, something in the way she said it, like it was the most obvious thing in the world, made the Iron Duke feel something he hadn't felt in years. Shame. When was the last time anyone had sat vigil for him? When was the last time anyone had cared whether he lived or died beyond calculating how his death would affect their inheritance or employment? You said your name was Elara. Yes, Your Grace. Thank you, Elara. The words felt foreign in his mouth. How long had it been since he'd thanked anyone? You may go. Get some rest. I'll have Mrs. Pemberton see that you're compensated for your time. She stood, smoothing her wrinkled dress. I don't need compensation, Your Grace. I am just glad you are going to be all right. And then she did something that would haunt him for weeks afterward. She smiled. Not a servant's smile, careful and calculated to please. Not a society smile, bright and forced and strategic. Just a genuine smile of relief that he was alive. Then she left, closing the door softly behind her. The Duke lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember the last time anyone had looked at him like that. Like he was a person instead of a position. Like his life mattered for reasons that had nothing to do with money or power. He couldn't remember, because it had never happened before. And that was the moment, weak, exhausted, still tasting death on his tongue, that the Iron Duke looked at Elara Winters for the first time and actually saw her. It would not be the last. Dr. Henshaw pronounced the Duke's recovery nothing short of miraculous. I've seen men half your age die from fevers half as severe, he admitted. Whatever happened, you're a lucky man, Your Grace. The Duke didn't believe in luck. Not anymore. But he found himself thinking about the young woman who'd prayed over him for 3 days while he hovered between life and death. He asked Mrs. Pemberton about her. Elara Winters? Oh, she's been with us about 2 years now, Your Grace. Quiet girl. Hard worker. Never causes trouble. Helps with the library mostly, and assists me when I need an extra pair of hands. Is she well compensated? It was a strange question for him to ask. He never inquired about servants' wages. That was the housekeeper's domain. Mrs. Pemberton looked surprised. She's paid fairly, Your Grace. Though between you and me, she could ask for twice what she makes and deserve it. I've never seen anyone work so hard. The Duke filed that information away. Over the following weeks, as he regained his strength, he became aware of Elara's presence in ways he never had before. He noticed her carrying linens through the East Corridor, noticed her reading to elderly Mr. Jameson, the retired groundskeeper, in the afternoons, noticed her slipping out late at night with a basket. Where was she going? It was none of his business. Servants' personal lives were their own. And yet, he was curious. One evening, recovered enough to walk the grounds, he found himself in the library. Elara was there, organizing books by candlelight, humming softly to herself. He cleared his throat. She spun around, nearly dropping the book she held. Your Grace, I apologize. I didn't realize you'd be here. I'll leave immediately. No, the word came out sharper than he intended. He softened his tone. Stay. I wanted to ask you something. She waited, hands folded, eyes respectful but unafraid. That was what struck him most. Everyone was afraid of him. Everyone except her. Why do you work here? She blinked. I beg your pardon. Why do you work here? He repeated. You're educated. I can see that from how you've organized these records. You could find employment elsewhere, perhaps in better conditions. Why stay? For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she said quietly, because I need the income, Your Grace. And Mrs. Pemberton has been very kind to me. The income? He studied her. You send money to someone. It wasn't a question. He'd noticed the basket she carried, asked a few discreet questions, found out she visited the charity hospital twice a week. Her face went carefully blank. I have family obligations, Your Grace. Nothing that interferes with my work. I'm not accusing you of neglecting your duties. I'm simply asking. She met his eyes then, and he saw something flicker there. A wall going up, protecting something precious. My brother is ill, Your Grace. I send what I can for his care. What's wrong with him? Consumption. The word hung between them like a pronouncement of death, because that's what it usually was. Consumption killed slowly, expensively, inevitably. I'm sorry, the Duke said, and meant it. Elara looked startled, then suspicious, like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop, for this to be some kind of test or trick. When nothing else came, she simply nodded. Thank you, Your Grace. Is there anything else you need? Yes. The word surprised him as much as it surprised her. Tell me about him. Your brother. Your Grace. I don't think. Please. That single word please seemed to shock her more than anything else could have. The Iron Duke didn't say please. Everyone knew that. He gave orders. He made demands. He never asked. Slowly, haltingly, she told him. About Thomas. About their parents. About raising a 7-year-old at 14. About working herself to exhaustion to keep him fed and clothed and alive. The Duke listened. Really listened. And somewhere in the telling, something inside him, something that had been frozen for 17 years, began to crack. Why didn't you ask for help? He asked when she finished. She gave him a look that was almost pitying. From whom, Your Grace? The world isn't kind to people like us. We learn to carry our own crosses. But you pray. Yes. Why? If God allows your brother to suffer, if he won't intervene, why keep praying? Elara was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft but absolutely certain. Because faith isn't about getting what you want, Your Grace. It's about trusting God even when he says no, even when the answer is suffering. Even when the cross gets so heavy you think it'll crush you. That seems like a cruel God. Or a God who sees further than we do. Who knows what we need more than we know ourselves. She paused. May I ask you a question, Your Grace? Yes. When you were lying in that bed, dying, were you afraid? The truth came out before he could stop it. Terrified. Of death. Of dying alone. Of dying empty. He hadn't meant to say that. Hadn't meant to reveal something so raw. But her eyes, those warm, honest eyes, pulled truth from him like a confessor. That's why you need God, she said simply. Not to avoid suffering. Not to guarantee happiness. But so that no matter what happens, you are never truly alone. Never truly empty. The Duke had no answer to that. That conversation was the first of many. The Iron Duke, who had spent 17 years avoiding meaningful human connection, found himself seeking out Elara Winters with a frequency that would have shocked the household if they'd noticed. But they didn't notice, because the Duke was careful. He asked questions about the library organization, requested her assistance with charity foundations he was considering, found reasons to need her input that seemed entirely professional. And through it all, they talked. She told him about her childhood, the little things she remembered about her mother, the way her father used to read to them by firelight, the sound of Thomas's laughter before illness stole his strength. He told her things he'd never told anyone, about the night his parents died, about the crushing weight of becoming a duke at 12, about the loneliness of being surrounded by people who wanted something from you, but never wanted you. Is that why you refused to marry? She asked one afternoon. They were walking through the gardens, a routine that had developed naturally, unconsciously. Yes. Every woman who sought my hand has seen the title, the estates, the wealth. None of them have seen me. Then they're fools, Elara said bluntly. He stopped walking, stared at her. What did you say? She had the grace to look embarrassed. "Forgive me, Your Grace. That was improper." "No," he caught her arm gently. "Say it again." "I said they're fools, because you're worth so much more than your title." She looked up at him, absolutely fearless. "You're brilliant. You're just. When you think no one's watching, you're kind. You just forgot how to let people see it." Something in his chest seized. "You see it?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I wasn't looking for a duke." She smiled sadly. "I was just looking for a man who needed someone to pray for him." That was the moment everything changed. Not with a kiss, not with a dramatic declaration, but with a sudden, blinding certainty that this woman, this poor, exhausted, faithful servant girl, had done what 37 noblewomen couldn't. She'd made him feel human again. 3 months after his illness, Duke Cassian Thornwood did something that shocked the kingdom to its core. He proposed marriage. Not to a duchess, not to an heiress, not to anyone the court expected. To Elara Winters, a servant. The Dowager Duchess, when she heard, smiled for the first time in years. "Finally," she whispered. "Finally, he's found his way back." But not everyone was pleased. The Duke's cousin, Lord Vincent Thornwood, third in line to the title, had spent years positioning himself for the moment. The Duke died unmarried and childless. He'd cultivated the right alliances, made the right investments, waited patiently for his cousin's heart of iron to guarantee his own inheritance. And now, with one impossible proposal, all his plans crumbled to ash. If the Duke married, if the Duke produced an heir, Vincent would never inherit, never become Duke, never claim the fortune he'd already mentally spent 1,000 times. This could not be allowed to happen. Vincent was clever, too clever to act rashly. He didn't protest the engagement publicly, didn't voice objections. Instead, he smiled and offered congratulations and began, very carefully, to plant seeds of doubt. A word here, a suggestion there, questions wrapped in concern. "Have you noticed how she always disappears on Tuesday evenings? Where does she go? Strange that she came to work here just months before you fell ill. Quite a coincidence. I'm sure there's an explanation for why she receives letters from London, though I wonder what business a servant would have with a gentleman in the city." The Duke, still learning to trust, still wounded from years of isolation, tried to ignore the whispers. But Vincent was patient, persistent. He knew exactly where to apply pressure, exactly which insecurities to exploit. Meanwhile, Elara was drowning in a world she never asked to enter. The engagement had been announced. The wedding was planned for spring. She should have been happy, but Thomas was getting worse. The physician's latest report had been devastating. Without more intensive treatment that cost more than Elara could ever hope to pay Thomas at 6 months at most, maybe less. She couldn't tell the Duke. How could she? Their entire relationship had been built on honesty, and now she was keeping the biggest secret of all. Every penny of the allowance the Duke had given her after their engagement, every coin she could spare, went straight to the hospital. She skipped meals to send more money, wore the same dress until the other servants began to whisper, developed shadows under her eyes that no amount of sleep could erase. And the Duke, consumed with wedding preparations and Vincent's poisonous insinuations, noticed her pulling away without understanding why. The Tuesday evening absences Vincent had mentioned, visits to Thomas, who was too weak now to leave the hospital, the letters from London, from the physician, demanding payment for treatments already rendered or threatening to discharge Thomas to the charity ward. The strange conversations she ended abruptly when the Duke approached, desperate prayers that God would somehow, miraculously, provide a way to save her brother without revealing her deception. Because that's what it felt like now. Deception. She should have told the Duke from the beginning, should have been honest about the crushing weight of Thomas's illness, the debt, the desperation. But she'd been afraid. Afraid he'd think she'd gotten close to him for his money. Afraid he'd call off the engagement. Afraid of losing the first person since her parents who'd made her feel like she mattered. So she said nothing, and the silence grew into a chasm. Vincent watched, waited, and when the time was right, he struck. It was 6 weeks before the wedding. The Duke was reviewing contracts in his study when Vincent arrived, looking grave and troubled. "Cousin, I hate to bring this to you, but I'd be failing in my duty as family if I remained silent." The Duke looked up, wary. "What is it?" Vincent laid a stack of papers on the desk. "I hired an investigator. Discreetly, you understand. I wanted to ensure your betrothed's past held no surprises that might embarrass the family." "You what?" The Duke's voice went dangerously quiet. "Please, don't be angry. I did it out of love for you. And thank God I did. Because..." He gestured to the papers. "Read them." With dread palling in his stomach, the Duke read. The documents painted a damning picture. Letters between Elara and a man in London taken out of context. They seemed intimate. Financial records showing money moving in complex patterns. Testimony from servants who'd seen her slipping out at odd hours. All of it carefully, deliberately arranged to suggest one thing, that Elara had been conducting an affair, that she'd targeted the Duke for his wealth, that the marriage was nothing but an elaborate con. None of it was true, but it was arranged just well enough to seem plausible. I am so sorry, Vincent said, sounding genuinely sympathetic. I know you cared for her, but you deserve to know the truth before you bind yourself to her forever. The Duke stared at the papers. His heart, that heart he'd just barely begun to thaw, turned back to ice. He'd been a fool. Again. He'd let himself be vulnerable. Let himself believe someone could love him for who he was. And all along, she'd been playing him like a fiddle. The Iron Duke had learned to pray, but he'd forgotten how to trust. And in that moment, faced with Vincent's carefully constructed lie, he made the worst decision of his life. He believed the evidence over the woman. That evening, he confronted Elara in the library. She knew something was wrong the moment she saw his face. The warmth was gone. The man who'd learned to smile had vanished, replaced by the cold, hard Duke the kingdom feared. Sit down, he said. She sat, hands folded in her lap, heart pounding. I'm going to ask you a question, and I want the truth. Where do you go on Tuesday evenings? Elara's blood went cold. This was it. The moment she'd been dreading. She should tell him everything. But fear locked her throat. I have personal business, Your Grace. Personal business with a gentleman in London? Her eyes widened. What? No, don't lie to me. His voice cracked like a whip. I have proof, letters, financial records. I know everything. You know nothing. The words burst from her. You have no idea. Then explain. He threw the papers at her feet. Explain the letters. Explain where the money goes. Explain why you've been sneaking around behind my back. She should tell him about Thomas. Should explain everything. But pride and hurt rose up in her throat, choking the words. He didn't trust her. After everything they'd shared, after all the conversations and confessions and moments of vulnerability, he believed lies over her. I don't owe you an explanation, she said coldly. Clearly, you've already made up your mind. That's it. That's all you have to say. She stood, drawing herself up to her full height. What would you have me say, Your Grace? That I'm innocent. Would you believe me? Or have you already convicted me based on papers provided by a man who has everything to gain from our separation? He flinched. She'd struck true, but his pride, that damned pride he'd built around his heart, wouldn't let him back down. The engagement is off, he said flatly. You'll leave the estate tomorrow. I'll provide a reference and a severance payment, but I never want to see you again. Elara felt something shatter inside her, but she didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't plead. She simply said, As you wish, Your Grace. Then she walked out of his life with her head held high and her heart in pieces. The Duke told himself he'd made the right decision, that he'd protected himself from a scheming fortune hunter, that he was better off alone, as he'd always been. He threw himself back into work, rebuilt the walls around his heart, became iron again. But at night, in the darkness, he heard her voice, saw her smile, remembered the way she'd prayed over him when everyone else had given up, and he wondered if he'd made the worst mistake of his life. 3 weeks passed. The Duke was miserable, though he'd never admit it. The Dowager Duchess, heartbroken at seeing her grandson retreat back into his shell, spent hours in her chapel praying for a miracle. Vincent, meanwhile, was jubilant. With the engagement broken, his path to inheritance was clear again. All he needed was for his cousin to remain unmarried and eventually, preferably soon, to die. Which gave him an idea. The Duke owned a steel factory on the outskirts of the city. Large, profitable, and if one knew where to look, dangerously outdated in certain areas. The steam boilers, for instance, were under tremendous pressure. The safety valves had been flagged for replacement months ago, but the Duke had been too distracted with his personal life to sign off on the repairs. All Vincent had to do was ensure those repairs continued to be delayed, and then, perhaps, arrange for the Duke to be touring the factory at exactly the wrong moment. It would look like a tragic accident, an explosion, a terrible loss for the kingdom, and Vincent would finally get everything he'd ever wanted. He began making arrangements. Meanwhile, Elara had returned to the tiny room she'd rented near the hospital. Using the severance pay the Duke had provided to keep Thomas in treatment for a few more precious weeks. But the money was running out, fast. Thomas was deteriorating. The physician pulled her aside one morning and delivered the news she'd been dreading. "Miss Winters, I'm sorry. Without immediate intervention, a surgery we discussed, the one we can't afford, your brother has perhaps 2 weeks, maybe 3. I wish I had better news." Elara thanked him and walked outside. She found a quiet corner behind the hospital and finally let herself break. She'd lost everything. The man she loved, her position, her hope. And now she was going to lose Thomas too. She fell to her knees in the dirt and screamed at God. All the pain she'd been holding back, all the fear and anger and desperation, came pouring out in a torrent that shook her entire body. "Why?" she sobbed. "Why give me hope just to rip it away? Why let me believe someone could love me? Why save the Duke just to let him destroy me? Why? Why?" No answer came. Just silence. Cold, empty silence. She knelt there for an hour, crying until she had no tears left. Then, empty and exhausted, she whispered one final prayer. "If this is your will, if Thomas is meant to die, if I'm meant to suffer, I'll accept it. I don't understand. It hurts so much I can barely breathe. But if this is the cross you've given me, I'll carry it. Just, please give me the strength to keep walking." And in that moment of complete surrender, something shifted. It wasn't a voice, wasn't a vision, just a quiet, unshakable certainty settling into her bones. This wasn't over. The next day, Vincent's plan came to fruition. He'd arranged for the Duke to tour the factory, citing concerns about productivity that required his personal attention. The Duke, eager for distraction from his misery, agreed. What the Duke didn't know was that Vincent had bribed one of the factory supervisors to disable the safety valves completely and push the boilers beyond their limits. The Duke arrived at the factory at 3 o'clock on a grey Thursday afternoon. Vincent accompanied him, playing the concerned cousin perfectly. They toured the floor, inspected the operations. The Duke noticed nothing amiss. Why would he? He had no reason to suspect sabotage. At 3:47, the head supervisor approached, looking nervous. "Your Grace, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's an issue with Boiler 3. The pressure readings are concerning. We should evacuate the floor." Vincent's eyes flickered. This was earlier than expected, but it would do. "Nonsense," Vincent said smoothly. "These boilers have been operating for years. I'm sure it's just a faulty gauge. We should inspect it directly, cousin. Due diligence and all that." The supervisor looked uncertain. "My lord, with respect, I really think—" "It's fine," the Duke said, already walking toward the boiler. They approached Boiler 3. The Duke leaned in to examine the pressure gauge. That's when Vincent made his move. He'd planned to be well clear of the factory when the explosion occurred, but fate had other ideas. In his eagerness to ensure his cousin was close enough to the boiler to be killed, Vincent had positioned himself too close as well. The pressure gate shattered. Steam screamed into the air like a dying dragon. The Duke jerked back, but not fast enough. Scalding steam seared his hand and face. He stumbled backward directly into the path of a falling support beam weakened by the heat. The beam came down like the hand of God. It caught the Duke across the chest and pinned him to the ground. The impact drove the air from his lungs and sent white-hot pain exploding through his ribs. Around them, the factory erupted into chaos. Workers screamed, alarms wailed. The sound of metal shrieking under stress filled the air. And then came the secondary explosion. Boiler 3 ruptured completely. The blast wave knocked men off their feet. Chunks of metal became shrapnel, flying in every direction. Fire bloomed like hellish flowers. The Duke, pinned beneath the beam, felt consciousness starting to slip away. He could smell smoke, feel heat washing over him, hear the roar of flames. He was going to die. After everything, after surviving illness, after pushing away the one person who'd ever truly loved him, after rebuilding his walls and returning to his lonely throne, he was going to die in a factory explosion, alone and full of regrets. Vincent, thrown clear by the blast but badly burned, dragged himself toward the exit. The plan had worked too well. He'd killed his cousin. Now he just needed to survive to inherit. But fate had one more card to play. Because at that exact moment, Elara was 2 streets away, returning from the hospital where she'd just spent her last coin on medicine for Thomas. She heard the explosion, felt the ground shake, saw smoke rising into the grey sky. And then she heard someone shouting, "The factory! Duke Thornwood's factory! There's been an explosion!" Her blood turned to ice. No. She started running. Her legs burned. Her lungs screamed. She ran faster than she'd ever run in her life. Her mind filled with one single, desperate prayer. Please let him be alive. She reached the factory to find complete pandemonium. Workers stumbling out, choking on smoke, foremen shouting orders, someone screaming for water, for physicians, for help. Elara grabbed a worker. The Duke. Was the Duke inside? The man's soot-stained face told her everything she needed to know before he spoke. Yes, miss. He was inspecting the floor when it blew. He's still in there. Is anyone going after him? Are you mad? The place is coming down. It's suicide. Elara let him go and started for the entrance. Multiple hands grabbed her, pulled her back. You can't go in there. He'll die. You'll die. Then I'll die. She shook them off with a strength born of pure desperation. But I won't leave him. She tore free and plunged into the inferno. The heat hit her like a physical wall. Smoke choked her lungs. Flames roared on all sides, eating through wood and oil and anything else they could reach. She pulled her shawl over her nose and mouth and kept moving through the main floor, past collapsed machinery, over bodies she couldn't stop to help because every second counted. Your Grace, she screamed. Cassian, using his name, not his title, his name. Through the smoke and chaos, she heard it. A weak voice. Here, help. She followed the sound, found him pinned beneath the beam, face grey with pain and smoke inhalation. Elara. He blinked, as if she were a hallucination. No, you need to leave, now. Not without you. It's too heavy. You can't. Watch me. She braced her hands under the beam and pulled with every ounce of strength she possessed. It didn't budge. She tried again, failed again. The flames were getting closer. The heat was unbearable. Timbers groaned overhead, ready to collapse at any moment. Elara closed her eyes and prayed, not eloquently, not calmly, just 3 desperate words repeated over and over. Please help me. Please help me. Please help me. And whether it was adrenaline or divine intervention or simply the human body's capacity to do the impossible when someone you love is dying, she felt the beam shift. Inch by agonizing inch, she lifted it. Now, she gasped. Move now. The Duke, using his last reserves of strength, dragged himself free. Elara dropped the beam and grabbed his arm. Can you walk? I'll try. He couldn't. His leg was badly injured. So Elara did what she'd been doing her entire life. She bore weight that should have crushed her. She got her shoulder under his arm and half carried, half dragged him toward the exit. He was easily twice her size. Every step was agony. Her muscles screamed. Her lungs burned. She could feel the heat of the flames blistering her exposed skin. But she didn't stop, couldn't stop. She thought of Thomas, of all the times she'd carried him as a child, of all the burdens she'd borne for the people she loved. This was just one more. The exit was 20 feet away, then 10, then 5. A timber crashed down behind them, sending up a shower of sparks. Almost there, she gasped. Stay with me. Almost there. They stumbled through the door and into the open air. Hands reached for them, pulling them clear of the building. Someone threw a blanket over the Duke's burned skin. Someone else tried to tend to Elara, but she pushed them away. Get him to a physician, now. Then her legs gave out, and darkness claimed her. When the Duke regained consciousness, he was in his own bed. Again, Dr. Henshaw was there. Again. But this time, the Dowager Duchess was beside him, tears streaming down her withered face. Grandmother. His voice was hoarse from smoke. Oh, thank God. Thank God. She clutched his hand. You stubborn, foolish boy. You nearly died. How long? 2 days? Your injuries were severe. Burns, broken ribs, a fractured leg. But you'll live. She paused. Thanks to her. The Duke's heart seized. Elara, where is she? His grandmother's face went carefully neutral, resting in the guest wing. She's not well, Cassian. He tried to sit up. Pain lanced through his chest. What happened? She ran into a burning factory to save you. The smoke damage to her lungs, the burns on her hands and arms. Dr. Henshaw is doing everything he can, but what? She may not make it through the night. The world tilted. No, that's not possible. She can't. I have to see her. You can barely move. I don't care. He threw off the blankets, gasping at the pain. If she's dying, I will crawl to her if I have to. But I will not let her die thinking I don't. He couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't say it aloud because speaking it would make it real. And if it was real, then he'd lost her forever. His grandmother helped him into a wheelchair. Every movement was torture, but he gritted his teeth and endured it. They wheeled him to the guest wing, to a room where Elara lay pale and still, her breathing shallow, her hands bandaged from the burns she'd sustained lifting that beam. The Duke sent everyone else away. Then he wheeled himself to her bedside and took her bandaged hand as gently as he could. Elara, he whispered. If you can hear me, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. She didn't respond, didn't move. I was a fool, a coward. I believed lies because it was easier than trusting someone, easier than risking my heart. And now you might die because of me. Still nothing. Vincent confessed everything before he succumbed to his own injuries. The sabotage, the forged evidence, all of it. He wanted me dead, and he almost got his wish. But you, his voice broke. You saved me. You ran into fire for me. Why? After what I did to you. Why would you do that? And then, so softly, he almost missed it, she spoke. Because I love you, you stubborn fool. His head snapped up. Her eyes were open, barely, but open. Don't talk, he said, tears streaming down his face. Save your strength. No, she squeezed his hand weakly. Need to tell you, Thomas, my brother, that's where I went, where the money went. I should have told you. I know everything now. The hospital sent word. I've arranged for the best surgeons in the country. He's being treated as we speak. A tear slid down her cheek. Thank you. Don't thank me. You saved my life. Twice now. You should hate me for what I did to you. Can't hate you. Tried. Couldn't. He brought her hand to his lips, kissing her bandaged fingers. I love you. I should have said it months ago. I love you. Not because you're kind or faithful or brave, though you're all those things. I love you because you made me want to be human again. You taught me how to pray, how to trust, how to feel. She smiled. It was a weak, pained smile, but it was real. Took you long enough to figure out. I'm sorry I'm so slow. Love you. Anyway, then live, please. Live, so I can spend the rest of my life proving I am worth the second chance you're giving me. Elara's eyes drifted closed. For a heart-stopping moment, he thought she was gone. Then she whispered, pray with me. The Iron Duke, who had forgotten how to pray, who had spent 17 years refusing to kneel before anything, got out of the wheelchair. Broken ribs and shattered leg be damned. He knelt beside her bed and bowed his head, and for the first time since he was a child, Duke Cassian Thornwood prayed. Not with elegant words, not with formal liturgy, but with raw, desperate honesty. God, he whispered, I don't know if I have the right to ask you for anything. I've spent years pushing you away. Years believing I didn't need anyone. But I need her. The world needs her. So please, if you can hear me, if you care about broken dukes who are just learning to pray, save her. Please save her. He prayed through the night. Through the next day. Through another night. The Dowager Duchess joined him. Servants who loved Elara came and went, adding their prayers to his. Dr. Henshaw did everything medicine could do and then admitted the rest was beyond his skill. On the third day, Elara's fever broke. On the fifth day, she opened her eyes and asked for water. On the seventh day, she sat up and demanded to know how Thomas was doing. Dr. Henshaw called it a miracle. The Duke called it answered prayer. Elara called it stubbornness. She had too much left to do to die now. 3 weeks later, when both the Duke and Elara were recovered enough to stand barely, they gathered in the estate's private chapel. Thomas was there, weak but healing, the Duke having arranged for the surgery that would save his life. The Dowager Duchess was there, weeping happy tears. Mrs. Pemberton and the household staff were there, beaming like proud parents. And Duke Cassian Thornwood, still bearing scars from the fire, stood at the altar and married Elara Winters. Not because she was noble, not because it made political sense, but because she had done what no one else could. She had taught the Iron Duke to kneel, to pray, to trust in something greater than himself, to love. The vows they spoke were traditional. The ceremony was beautiful, but the moment that defined everything came afterward, when they were alone in the chapel. The Duke, no longer quite so iron, though still plenty stubborn, knelt before his wife and spoke words he'd never said to anyone. I don't deserve you. I'm still learning how to trust, how to love properly, how to put someone else before myself. I'll make mistakes, probably a lot of them. But I promise you this. I will spend every day of my life trying to be the man you saw in me when no one else could. The man who was worth running into a fire for. And I will love you faithfully, stubbornly, for better or worse until my last breath. Elara knelt beside him, taking his scarred hands in her own. You already are that man. You just needed to remember. And I will remind you every day, through every storm, for as long as we both live, that you are loved. Not for what you own or what you can provide, but for who you are beneath the armor. They prayed together then, not asking for anything, not bargaining with God, simply giving thanks for survival, for second chances, for a love that had been refined in fire and emerged stronger for it. The kingdom talked about it for years, the scandalous marriage of the Iron Duke to a servant. Some called it a fairy tale. Others called it madness. But those who were there, who saw the transformation, knew the truth. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was something better. It was redemption. Because the strongest love isn't born in ballrooms or announced with trumpets. It's born in hospital rooms and burning factories, in prayers whispered over sickbeds and faithfulness when every reason to give up presents itself. The Iron Duke learned to pray, and in learning to pray, he learned to love. Not the perfect, polished love of romantic poetry, but the real, scarred, stubborn love that chooses the other person every day, that runs into fires, that carries impossible weights, that kneels together in the darkness and trusts that dawn will come. Thomas grew stronger under the care of the kingdom's best physicians, eventually becoming a respected physician himself, dedicating his life to treating the poor. The Dowager Duchess lived to see 3 great-grandchildren born, each one named with a part of Elara's name woven in. And Duke Cassian and Duchess Elara Thornwood ruled their estates with justice tempered by mercy, power tempered by compassion, always remembering what it meant to be broken and remade. Every morning, before the household stirred, they knelt together in the chapel, not because it was expected, not because it was tradition, but because they'd learned that the only way to bear the weight of living the joys and the sorrows, the victories and the losses, was to do it together, and to do it before the one who was greater than both of them. The Iron Duke never forgot what Elara taught him, that true strength isn't found in walls we build. It's found in the willingness to let those walls fall, to be vulnerable, to trust, to pray, and that sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't fighting, it's kneeling. This is the story of the Iron Duke, the servant who saved him, and the God who saved them both, not with splendor or spectacle, but with suffering, sacrifice, and a faith that ran into the fire when everyone else ran away. May we all find the courage to do the same.